According to a report from the German magazine Spiegel, the US environmental activist Jennifer Morgan is to become the federal government's special representative for international climate policy. The federal cabinet would decide that on Wednesday, that's the day when I'm filming the video, the news magazine reported, citing a template. So far it hasn't happened. Morgan is currently the head of Greenpeace International and is considered to be well connected internationally. The Foreign Office of Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock from the Greens did not confirm the personnel, but invited the new special representative to be presented on Wednesday. And according to the report, the 55-year-old would later become state secretary at the Federal Foreign Office. This is not immediately possible because Morgan is a US citizen. She should become a civil servant as soon as she has been granted German citizenship. An application is currently being processed at full speed, they say. Morgan's new tasks will include representing Germany at the World Climate Conferences. In the dispute over the obligation to vaccinate nursing and hospital staff, Health Minister Karl Lauterbach insists on implementing the implementation by the federal states against the will of Bavaria and the Christian Democrats. Bavaria's Prime Minister Markus Söder has clarified his own controversial statements. As things stand at present, implementation is hardly possible, said the CSU boss in Munich. In general, Söder made it clear that Bavaria still stands by the facility-related vaccination requirement, but the federal government must now improve and top up so that it can also be implemented for the states and for the facilities. The law applies and we will work with everyone to make it easier to implement, said Lauterbach. Söder emphasized that both the municipalities and the institutions would sound the alarm, that there was deep concern about how the requirements should be implemented, including a number of labor law issues. Anyway, as it is now, it ends up in chaos and hurts the whole effort to vaccinate, he said. Bavaria will therefore use all leeway to suspend the implementation for the time being. Lauterbach indirectly accused Söder of wanting to avoid conflicts with opponents of the institution-related vaccination requirement. This is an unpopular enforcement measure that leads to temporary staff absences in some states, he said. No one likes doing that. And they obviously want to avoid this conflict because they think the Omicron variant is so harmless that it's no longer needed. But he says this would be absurd. Lauterbach sees not really many lines of compromise in the dispute. Either the law also applies to Bavaria or the law does not apply. It is about the particularly vulnerable people who are entrusted to the employees. Backing for Söder came from the president of the German Red Cross, Gerda Hasselfeld. If such a decision is made, the implementation issues must also be clarified, said the former chairman of the CSU state group on German radio. Söder defended the actions of his free state. Bavaria stands by the facility-related vaccination requirement, but it cannot be implemented in its current form, he said. The federal government must improve and top up the thing so it can be implemented. Well, if the law doesn't work, you can always make a law, but you have to also make sure that the law can be put in practice. And listening to Söder, it seems that there are some, let's say, competences that are not so very clear when he's talking about the working rights, and also that there are some things they didn't think about when they made the law. So it will be an interesting thing. The leader of the Liberal parliamentary group in the Bundestag, Christian Dürr, told German media that as soon as there was no longer risk of the health system being overloaded, restrictions would have to be withdrawn. That's why we are already talking about concrete opening perspectives, he said. The next Prime Minister's Conference should take the first decisions on this. The German Association of General Practitioners called on the federal government to draw up an opening plan for the exit from the corona measures. Federal Minister of Health Karl Lauterbach only warned on Tuesday against a quick lifting of the measures and described the discussion about easing as inappropriate. We don't really have the situation under control yet, he said. A peak in the Omicron wave is expected for the middle of this month. On Wednesday morning, the Robert Koch Institute reported another high with a 7-day incidence of 1,450.8 new infections per 100,000 inhabitants. Within one day, 234,250 additional infections were recorded, with the number of infections likely to remain undetected. And the federal chairman of the German General Practitioners Association, Ulrich Weigelt, told the editorial network Germany, politics must already develop a concept of how the opening steps should look like in concrete terms. It is essential to avoid that hectically inconsistent and not well thought out relaxation measures are decided. And the Green politician Dieter Janicek called for minors to be taken into account first when easing. Children and young people finally need complete normality again. They should be the first to benefit from openings, he told German media. For youth sports and club life, all restrictions should be lifted promptly. And the liberal health expert Christine Aschenberg-Dugnus wants to give children broad access to educational, sports and cultural facilities. This should be done regardless of vaccination status and be implemented first when measures are relaxed. In view of the high fuel prices, the federal government is discussing adjusting the commuter allowance in the tax return. Finance Minister Christian Lindner from the Liberals was open to such a reform, which would primarily relieve employees and the self-employed with a long commute to work. The Greens, on the other hand, put the brakes on immediately. Aid should not fuel fossil inflation any further, they say. With a commuter flat rate, the travel costs for the way to work can be tax deductible, regardless of which means of transport you use to travel. Critics consider it harmful to the climate because, from their point of view, it encourages people to live far away from work. According to the previous plan, the flat rate is to be gradually increased in the coming years in order to cushion the additional financial burden caused by the rising CO2 price. Lindner emphasized that there must be an agreement not only between the coalition partners SPD, Greens and FDP, but also between the federal states in order to now shake up the commuter allowance to relieve the burden. If there is an agreement to do something about it, the finance minister would not fail, he told German television. Because in fact, in the broad middle of society, people are affected by rising energy costs. If German politicians agree to do something about the distance and commuter allowance, then the finance minister would not fail. On the contrary. Well, we will see how that one ends. And I'll see you in my next video. Bis gleich.